All right, we are live. Hello, hello, everybody. And I know we'll have some folks coming in as we get going here a little bit. Um, just want to take a moment to tell you guys it's been a little while since we've done a live stream. And we did this last year, so some of you may be familiar with it, but I've had the privilege of being just a small part of this event over the last few years since it got started, the Gettysburg Film Festival. And we have the distinct privilege of having really kind of two of the main driving forces behind this film festival with Jake Borrett and Andrew Dalton here. So why don't, Andrew, I give you a chance to just go ahead and start and just talk a little bit about what this is and why it matters.
Well, thanks, Chris. It's great to have you involved as we have in the past. And Chris is going to be at the festival again this year, so make sure you come out. He's going to be introducing a screening of The Patriot on Thursday night. But the film festival started a few years ago. It is really the first and only festival in the country that's focused exclusively on American history in cinema. And so we have documentaries, feature films. We even get into music and art and of course, traditional history. We'll have a lot of authors and historians as well. But the event, it started, and Jake will tell you more about it, but it started in 2023 with Ken Burns, and it's sort of taken off since then. And our theme this year is the American Revolution. Every year there's sort of a different theme. And of course, for the 250th, it was natural to select the Revolution as our subject. And there are quite a few films and stories and guests that we're excited about. But it all started with Ken Burns and Jake reaching out to him to see if a history film festival in Gettysburg might be possible.
Jake, you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a filmmaker. I grew up in Gettysburg. I literally moved back to the old farmhouse that I grew up in after a couple of decades in New York City, making primarily documentary films and a lot of history documentaries. And got to know Ken Burns, of course, associated with Gettysburg and the Civil War for sure. And then in the summer of 2020, which of course was COVID and political unrest and all the stuff that was going on. And I had literally my two kids and my wife, we had just moved back. And we're wondering, Ken, what would be great is a film festival, Ken Burns in Gettysburg. And, I've proposed other things to Ken in the past, and he's a very busy guy, as you'd expect, and booked really kind of unique in the sense that he's a documentary filmmaker that has projects booked for a decade out or more. And, many projects and other ancillary parts of it and so forth. And he wrote back very quickly that love it, lots to work out. And that's sort of become our mantra. I remember turning to my wife at that moment saying, like, that's a yes. And so then it really kind of changed the trajectory. And we worked with Gettysburg College's Majestic Theater that year. And we put on a festival. Well, I should say it was in 2023. The original ask was in 2020, but took a couple years to get everybody's schedule lined up. And of course, to have it safe to go into theaters in large masses. So in February of 2023, we came together for a couple days in Gettysburg, and it was pretty much all of Ken Burns' work. He selected the ones that he wanted, and it was really special. And it was sort of this, particularly for Ken's work. I mean, he's so associated with public broadcasting, and most people watch his stuff on TV. And so to be in a theater and watch it on a big screen was a really special experience. And then, of course, to have Ken Burns there, and his longtime writing partner, Jeffrey Ward, was there, cinematographer, Buddy Squires, Alan Moore. We had Kevin Richardson from the Central Park Five, who was one of the subjects of one of his films. And so, like, it was sort of this really special, unique thing. A lot of people that we got a lot of good feedback, most importantly from Ken himself, who wanted to come back. And so then I remember turning to Andrew, and that same weekend we had just had the soft opening for a brand new museum, the Beyond the Battle Museum in Gettysburg. Andrew had, how many steps did you walk in the 48 hours? Or how many miles did you walk setting up the first?
I don't know. It was
like
more
20 miles in like a day.
30,000 steps or something.
All that to say, it was a very intense period of this film festival in this museum. Ken loved all of it, and so then he wanted to do it again. And so then worked very closely with Andrew as a producer, and we did it again in 2024, which was focused on American presidential elections. And then Ken wanted to come back, and we had more people come back. And so like Martin Sheen and Sam Waterston and a lot of other great filmmakers. I know, Chris, you came, and JD and a lot of other folks. And so then people started before we had any plans. People were like, well, what's next year going to be? And so then in last year, in 25, of course, it was 80th anniversary of victory in Europe was May 8th, and that was the day of the festival, which was the days Ken could be there. And so we focused on that. There's a lot of great stuff. Of course, Gettysburg's associated with Dwight Eisenhower, and there's no shortage of films and TV shows about World War II. So we touched on it a little bit, a lot of focus on Ken's series on World War II and some other works. And then, the theme was very obvious this year in 2026, and Ken Burns and his crew have a brand new film, which I'm sure many people have seen, on the American Revolution, which has set ratings records again and sort of been this astonishing cultural moment and a really, special time in our country's history, i.e., a quarter millennium old now, almost.
Yeah.
If we make it to July 4th.
Just babies as a country still.
Yeah. And so that's what we're doing. And Andrew's been, essential to really like figuring out all of the guests and the booking. There's a lot of details. We have a lot of really great supporters here. And so it sort of blossomed into this thing that, wow, it's awesome to watch history on screen together in movie theaters and auditoriums and so forth. And it's especially awesome to have people like Ken Burns and the actors and filmmakers that are part of it talk about it. And so that's the whole gestation of it right there.
Awesome. I'm just acknowledging something for the viewers. I just got a message from somebody that said that folks are having trouble posting comments in the chat. So while we're going through this, I'm going to be working on figuring out why that is. I saw a couple when we first started, but I wondered why it was so quiet, because it usually is not in my chats. But you made a good point, Jake, and I know that there have been some people who seem confused by Gettysburg and the American Revolution, or Gettysburg and World War II. And, they see, for example, the image for the film festival, and they say, well, you got the wrong war. I saw somebody make that comment and say, you've got the wrong war. Well, though Gettysburg, obviously, in our collective minds is heavily associated with the Civil War because of the battle that was fought there, this film festival is not limited to that. It's about history in film, and like you said, with the World War II last year, with the Revolution this year. So though it's in Gettysburg, it's not confined to that. And Andrew, he made a reference to the Beyond the Battle Museum, which is, I think, how I first got really connected to all this, was coming out for that grand opening. By the way, if folks haven't been to it, if you're in Gettysburg, you have to go to the Beyond the Battle Museum. It's phenomenal. But it's also not just about the Civil War, right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, in World War II in particular, last year we had the great connection that Jake mentioned, that Dwight D. Eisenhower, lived here and was our most famous resident for the last chapter of his life, and even during his presidency as a kind of getaway from Washington. But yeah, I mean, this area, our local history is intertwined with national history all the way back to the beginning. We were on the frontier of European settlement. There were very famous incidents during the French and Indian War of kidnappings, in particular Mary Jemison, who's quite well known for being taken from her home, and she, was her family was killed. She was kept alive and ended up with the Seneca in upstate New York, and maintained a life among Native Americans for the rest of her time, and didn't ever return. But that started here near Gettysburg, where before the town of Gettysburg even existed, when her family lived on the frontier. Jake has actually made a film in part about that. But, I think all of American history really funnels through Gettysburg. Ken was here, I think 2 years ago, and a reporter asked him, why Gettysburg? Why do all these American history topics in Gettysburg? And he said, we drop a pebble in the pond of Gettysburg and it ripples out. And I thought that, what a prophetic statement to make, especially off the cuff, which Ken is known to make these types of incredible comments, seemingly out of thin air. He's just a brilliant person. But anyway, that is, I think that really is true, that Gettysburg is a way for us to look at the entire American story, whether it be the Revolution or World War II or everything in between.
And just to add to that, as I just talked about, and Andrew mentioned that Ken was certainly the gestation. He wanted to come here. He has 200 dozen films about American history. But of course, the most famous moment in Gettysburg's history is when Abraham Lincoln came here and he spoke for a couple minutes, and it was a speech. But that was kind of the cinema of the day. People went to see great orators speak. And, whatever it was, 15, 20,000 people or more came and saw Lincoln, and he gave this short speech. But what was really profound about it is that he looked to the past, and it was a popular audience, thousands of people. And he looked back to July 4th, 1776, to the founding, not to the Constitution, but to the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of take that in some ways as our motivating moment, that Lincoln looks to the past to explain the worst moment in American history, when we are killing each other on Gettysburg and many other battlefields. And then he envisions this amazing future, a new birth of freedom and government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And so the way Lincoln looks to the past to understand the present and have a vision for the future is very much an inspiration to what we're doing, clearly tied to the place where we're doing it here in Gettysburg. And I think it's just vital. And yeah, we're not going to see speeches anymore in a cemetery necessarily. We're watching in screens, whether it be the big screen or little screens like this, where a lot of people see stuff. But I think it was really special to look at our past collectively together. And, and we're in divided times too. I would say they pale in comparison to what was going on in 1863 here. But nonetheless, we hear all the time about how divided America is and so forth. But we can look at our history, and whether that's Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, or Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee, or, Jackie Robinson and Richard Nixon, or whatever it is, like there's a lot of great history that can teach us and guide us both for the moment we're in, and then how do we make the future what we want it to be as Americans. And I think that's that idea that Lincoln looked to the past to explain the present and envision a future is vital to what we're doing with this film festival.
And it's remarkable too. I think maybe Gettysburg is part of the draw, but it's, from the very beginning, having Ken Burns, having Gettysburg as this place to gather, we've had the privilege of having some pretty amazing people that have been a part of this. You want to talk a little bit about some of the folks we've had in the past, and then we'll start looking at this year's festival if you want.
Yeah, we have. I mean, Jake mentioned in 2024 and 2025, we've had Sam Waterston, Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen's been back, and Sam Waterston's now coming back for our festival on April 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But, last year we had a great collection of historians, also musicians. We had the singer Trace Adkins and Judy Collins, very different genres, but they were both here to help us, commemorate the World War II anniversary. And we've had a range of other actors and filmmakers and historians, and it just seems to get better every year. This lineup we're particularly proud of. We have, in addition to Ken and Sam Waterston, 2 and possibly 3 original cast members from the original Broadway production Hamilton. Of course, the cultural sensation. If you look at American history and popular culture, I can't think of anything that's had the impact that Hamilton has had. And so we're going to be having 2 events with Chris Jackson and Philippa Sue, they play George Washington and Eliza Hamilton respectively in that show. So we've already almost sold out the one, which is the fastest we've ever seen tickets go. There's still just a few left if you're watching and you're a Hamilton fan. But we have that. We also are really leaning into another major cultural production turn, the Revolution Spies, which was a popular AMC television series for many years. And I enjoyed it, watched parts of it. And we have Heather Lind, who's one of the starring actors from that show coming, and possibly
she was Anna Strong. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And a couple others we hope as well that we will be announcing soon. And we do have, of all the historians of the Revolution, I would say we have 2 of the very best. Rick Atkinson, who has a trilogy that's actively being released over the course of this anniversary. He'll be speaking at 2 events. And also Annette Gordon-Reed, who's just synonymous with Thomas Jefferson's story and the story of how the Hemings family ties into Jefferson. She will be here as well, speaking with Sam Waterston, who portrayed Jefferson in Ken's series many years ago, which I think is going to be a fun conversation. And then also General Stanley McChrystal is coming. We wanted a military perspective, and boy, we're getting about as best as we could hope for with that. He'll be on stage with Rick Atkinson and Ken to talk about the strategy and kind of the leadership decisions behind the really incredible victory over the greatest empire in the world. by a ragtag bunch of untrained militia. And so that is a story that I think we'll get the historical perspective on, but also possibly a more modern military perspective from General McChrystal. It's really a great lineup. Susan Eisenhower is going to speak as well. We wanted to do something about the generals who have become presidents of the United States. And so there are, of course, more than three, but there are three that commanded large armies in combat, and that would be, of course, Grant, Washington, and Eisenhower. So those will be the figures that we focus on. But there's just so much in the schedule. We're really looking forward to it, and we kick things off with you on Thursday, April 2nd, with a panel about popular culture with J.D. Hewitt from the History Underground and Jared Frederick from Real History, and then of course Chris White from the American Battlefield Trust and historian Ken Gavin. So that's going to be really great.
Yeah, so that's one of the nice things, in highlighting that and some of the other stuff you've just mentioned. One of the great things about this event is there really is something for everybody. I mean, there's something for the hardcore history nerds that want like the deep dives into specific topics or want to hear perspectives. And then there's stuff for like my kids who are both obsessed with Hamilton. And it even got my daughter to want to go to the Gettysburg Film Festival this year. So, and she's actually... Yeah, I have to say, she's the one who introduced me to Hamilton. I was a theater kid in high school. My two kids that are coming with me are both theater kids. But when I first heard, like a lot of people, when I first heard about Hamilton, I was like, I don't know about that. But then I listened to it, and like everybody else, I was blown away and just drawn to it. And it's such a unique way to tell the story of our founding. The way that they do, and they do a phenomenal job with it. So you mentioned the thing we're doing, and that'll be a lot of fun. That's anytime you get that group of us together, we always have a good time. So
and tickets will be going on sale for that tomorrow, by the way.
Oh, okay, cool. So, you'll see some of these events say tickets coming soon, and I believe you're already sold out of like the festival wide passes, right?
The passes are there. We are sold out, unfortunately. There are quite a few of those. There are 125, and they went very fast. So we are actually running out of seats on some of these events on Thursday, which we, again, it's a good problem to have, but look out tomorrow there will be some tickets, a limited number of tickets on sale for all of those events. And also the screening of The Patriot on Thursday night, which if you haven't seen The Patriot, it's a really fun movie. It is not necessarily grounded in history as much as
we're going to talk about that a little bit in the introduction, but it doesn't mean you can't have a blast watching it, and doesn't mean there's not a lot for us to be able to get from it about the nature of the war and things like that. So the next event here, we've got another, you mentioned Susan Eisenhower already, who has been kind of a staple of events in Gettysburg, who's Ike's granddaughter. She's amazing. She's super smart, really nice, and just really has a lot of really valuable stuff to share. Jeff Shera, who is an author who wrote Gods and Generals, among other things. And
That's right.
And then our friend Chris Mikowski.
I think uniquely, Jeff has written about all three of these presidents too. So I think that'll be a nice perspective. And Jeff has a new book about Lincoln that's coming out later this year as well.
Oh, cool.
So
he's the son of Michael Shera, for those who read The Killer Angels, which is the book that the movie Gettysburg was based on.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you mentioned already we have film screenings each night.
That's right.
And I'll be hosting the one the first night. And these things, what's great about it too is there's so much going on throughout the day that you can kind of go to some and if you need a little downtime in between, that works too. And and then we've already briefly talked about this, but you want to talk about anything in particular from Friday?
Sure. We talked about kind of the session that's most focused, I think, on military strategies at 2:30 with Ken, Rick Atkinson, and General McChrystal. We have Turn in the morning. This is kind of a hidden gem in the schedule. We're doing a kind of a live theater experiment at the Dobbin House, where there will be food and living history going on in all areas of the historic 1776 building. So this is going to be a really unique event where you can sample some of their really famous items off of their menu, and also see some living history theater as you move through the house in different areas of the house. So that's in the late afternoon into the dinner hour. and we're really excited about that one. And then
So
the evening
correct me.
program is on Washington. Yep.
One of you guys can tell me if this is the case or not, but is the Dobbin House the only building in Gettysburg that would have been around at the time of the Revolution?
It's the only building that's still standing that was here at the time of the Revolution. There were a couple others in the immediate vicinity of Gettysburg. The town was founded kind of on the end of that spectrum, 1786. In 1776, it would have been the Dobbin House, and then the Geddes family actually operated a tavern that no longer stands, unfortunately. And that was near the famous square, the town square, that I'm sure many of your viewers have been to. The tavern burned in 1880, unfortunately, so it's gone. We wish that was still there, because that really is the origin of the town. James Geddes is the son of Samuel Geddes, and James actually fought in the Revolution. So that and the Dobbin House are really all you would have seen if you had passed through Gettysburg in 1776. Although there already was an intersection at that location, there was just no town around it until the 1780s and 1790s when it really started to develop. But the Dobbin House is this amazing, lasting relic of this period. And if you haven't been to the Dobbin House, it's just an incredible place. Not just an incredible restaurant, but just you get the sense of a different time period that you wouldn't, like you said, necessarily associate with Gettysburg. But it's very present in that beautiful building.
So Jake, you want to tell us a little bit about this evening event that you're a part of?
Yeah, well, that's going to be special because it's George Washington's. Obviously, Ken Burns has this series that's just come out where Washington is the indispensable man and is central to it. And I think it'll be interesting to have Christopher Jackson who plays Washington. Probably more people have learned about George Washington in kind of a younger audience from Christopher Jackson than any other person. Of course, Lin-Miranda's musical is not a historical research document or anything like that, but it's pretty good history at kind of base level. Like, I mean, I read the book and read some other things about Hamilton, and it's amazing, it's certainly artistic interpretation. And then of course there's some, kind of awesome racial dynamics that Christopher Jackson's an African-American man, and he's playing George Washington, of course, is a white, one of the largest, I believe he's the wealthiest or among the wealthiest men in Virginia and in the colonies, and owns a lot of enslaved Black people. So there's some very interesting things to talk about. Christopher Jackson interpreting George Washington, the marble-faced man in our culture, and then it becomes a sensation. So I think that's going to be really neat. And I think Ken, who has this new series, but I think if there's any sort of historical pop culture moment in my lifetime that compares to Hamilton, it would have been Ken's Civil War series, who became, the front page of national magazines, and he kind of became a cultural icon in his own right. And the Civil War became this hot thing because of this, long multi-part PBS documentary series. So we're sort of fascinated to talk to these people that are central to turning American history into cultural events. I mean, I don't know what to call Hamilton and Ken Burns' Civil War, but they still resonate today. I mean, you go and look at ratings on streamers, and Ken Burns' Civil War series, which was I think 1990, is still one of the top rated documentaries, and Hamilton is still selling out theaters where it goes, and of course the soundtrack and just the effect on culture and the mixtapes and all the musical stuff that's come out of that. They're special. Very special beyond the historical aspect, which is why they're at our festival. I think they're really special in kind of American culture, and it's going to be really fun. I'm very excited for that one, to have these two people discuss how does that come about, because I know in both cases they didn't expect it to be what it became. How could you, right? So that'll be fun. And
I'm not sitting here right now without Ken Burns' Civil War. I mean, that's one of the main reasons I got into history in the first place. And I think there's a lot of people who can say that, and probably a lot like my kids who will say that what got them interested in the Revolution and in characters like Washington and Hamilton is musical.
To your point, when my kids, I think, are a tad younger than yours, but this is a few years ago, and it was well after Hamilton had come out, but my 3 or 4 year old son, my middle guy, Ellis, he was in his preschool. And he had two buddies, and he came home one day with a stack of papers, like cut up, sort of scribbled on papers, dozens of them, 100 maybe. And I asked, what are they? And again, we had been listening on repeat to the Hamilton soundtrack, and my preschool son had written the Federalist Papers. And of course, he had convinced two of his buddies to be Madison and John Jay.
That's awesome.
And he was Hamilton, who wrote the other, what did I can't even quote?
51.
The other 51, right? Yeah. And so that again, like if your preschool kid is like talking about the Federalist Papers, that is a transcendent moment for history. So I think that's going to be really cool to just, yes, the history and the stories of Hamilton and the Civil War and in the Revolutionary, all the history that Ken does is fascinating, but in some ways the place it is in our contemporary culture, and these guys that are now forever associated with these landmark moments will be fun. And then, Andrew and I always talk about this, is our hope is, how can we do stuff like that again? How can there be other great cultural moments that could bring us together around a great work of art that focuses on American history? And I think that's another motivating factor for this festival, is to both showcase what's been done, but encourage more and more work.
Yeah. And to the point about the history of Hamilton, I mean, for those who don't know, it started because Lin-Manuel Miranda read Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton, which is phenomenal, by the way, as are his ones of Grant and Washington and others that he's done. But, compared to most TV shows and movies about history, Hamilton's a lot closer to the history than those things are. In fact, actually, one of the very first videos I ever made on my channel was a breakdown of Hamilton and talking about what it got right and what it got wrong about history. And most of it is what it got right. So they do a great job with that. Something that's been, that's come up and we should address, this year with Ken Burns' new phenomenal series on the Revolution, is I had a lot of people in the comments in videos calling it woke and all these sorts of things. But I just have to say, and I think you guys could probably echo this, I don't know anybody that I've met who is as passionate about loving this country as Ken Burns is. I mean, he absolutely makes these documentaries because he loves this country, its flaws and all. And, that's the thing. When you love something, you can love it despite the fact that sometimes we don't always get it all right. And but I know you guys have had plenty more experience with Ken than I have. But he does. He loves this country. He loves telling the story of this country. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's so passionate about this film festival, is it's an opportunity to get more people to love history as well.
Well, I think Ken always talks about, in their edit room, they have a neon sign that says it's complicated. And I think it's easy to simplify history, for either heroic, whatever your agenda is or whatever you want to do. But when you actually get into the historical facts, and Ken uses, in that film you mentioned, the Revolution, just really, really strong scholars. And it's good history. It's good historical research. But then he weaves these narratives of characters and tragedy and triumph and romance. And it's so much. And it's the expanse of the Revolution. Ken's been doing this for almost 50 years, and that's a massive series. And the amount of characters, some who are, iconic, like George Washington or, Hamilton or Adams or what have you. But then there's, that war in particular, there's so many myths around it that we've created, our sort of creation myth of America. And you need that to some extent. But then there, when it's not accurate, whether it be something that might be silly, like the Betsy Ross flag, or, more profound things about enslavement and people's human rights and so forth, that we need to understand. I watched it a couple times now, and it's the complexity of that war, who's on what side, the Native American nations, the loyalists, the English, the French, what do they want? What do the Spanish want? The global nature of that war. Like we always learned that it was these 13 colonies, and, some farmers from the Massachusetts countryside rise up against this great army. And then, George Washington leads them, and they make an army at Valley Forge, and then they beat them, and Yorktown surrendered because the French come in. And that's a very simplified version, but the complexity of that war, and, Ben Franklin fighting his own son, who's a loyalist. And that happens a lot. It's truly that the Revolution was much more of a civil war on this continent, in the way that the Civil War was much more of a revolution to erase, the fundamental economic institution of slavery. in the name of the United States. And so I think, yeah, sure, call it woke, and you can disagree. That's the beauty of it, and that's the war that made the country that allows you to do that, right?
Right. History is not black and white. It's nuance. It's gray area. And the revolution, I think, encapsulates that as well as anything does. It was not a black and white issue. It was not this is just about taxation without representation. And, there were complicated reasons why people fought and why they chose the sides they did. And, hopefully some people are getting some of that. So let's talk a little bit about the last day, and then we'll get to some questions that folks have had. I think I've got some of the chat issues worked out. We do have a couple questions there. So again, we've got a Hamilton event in the morning with Philippa Sue, who was Eliza, and Chris Jackson, who played George Washington, and Catherine Malone France. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. That one is, gosh, people are so excited about that. And we're hoping we might have a third guest. We'll see. I don't want to promise anything.
I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, I know. We'll see. I can't guarantee it because I actually don't know.
Fingers crossed, everybody. It's good stuff.
And yes, Catherine Malone France from the Better Angels Society, a great friend of ours. That's the nonprofit that works very closely with Ken to help fund new historical documentary films. And they do such a wonderful job, and student work as well. They work with kids and do contests, film contests. And Ken actually helps the students with those films and gives his input and guidance, which is really exciting. We're actually bringing some of those students here again to Gettysburg to screen their short films before some of these programs. But cool. The Hamilton event is in the morning, and then the afternoon we have this great event about Thomas Jefferson and really connecting it to Lincoln. And as Jake said, the first words of the Gettysburg Address 77 years ago, and how the promise of the United States evolved over the course of those 187 years. So it's a really great topic, and the panel could not be better. Annette Gordon-Reed, Harold Holzer, who's a noted Lincoln, one of the foremost Lincoln scholars, Sam, who's played Jefferson and Lincoln. So that'll be a unique point for him. And of course, Ken. And then Annette and Harold will be signing books after that. In the evening, we're going to cap things off with a conversation with Ken about kind of the voices, both known and previously unknown, that were incorporated into his new series. And his longtime collaborator, Jeff Ward, is going to be here for that conversation. We were about to put that out formally, announce that. And there will be a concert later that evening as part of that event with Jay Unger and Molly Mason, who are the soundtrack of Ken's many, many years of creating documentary films. And part of that soundtrack, of course, there's been many other artists, and we may even have one or two of those joining for that evening. But as of now, Jay and Molly, they're going to be doing a great set about kind of the origins of American music and how American
who has heard the Civil War soundtrack is intimately familiar with Ashokan Farewell, which is probably one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard.
It is, and I'm sure that they will play that. And then we're ending things with another musical interpretation of the Revolution, 1776. Which we'll screen in the evening, and Jared Frederick's going to introduce that film. But that's a great, obviously, if you've not seen 1776, either the movie or a theatrical version of it, it is a hilarious and educational take on the Revolution. I love it. It's kind of an older and very different version of I think what Hamilton has done for a more modern audience with bringing the Revolution into kind of the musical world. And we also are going to have a living history encampment throughout the weekend. So you might hear some muskets going off, maybe even a cannon. There will be horses and lots of activities at the high school, Gettysburg High School, which is our largest venue that's involved with the festival this year.
Awesome. So let me go ahead and remove this from the screen. And, it's been on the screen the whole time, but for anybody who's interested, wants to get tickets, wants to read more about it, GettysburgFilmFestival.org is the website that we've been showing here. That'll take you to that. You can look at stuff about the special guests, including this really shady looking dude down here at the bottom, next to a couple of other really shady looking dudes down here at the bottom. It's highly worth your time.
Chris, is your picture taken? Is that picture from Willoughby Run?
It is from Willoughby Run.
I've wondered that for a while. I was going to ask you because I grew up right along Willoughby Run, so I was pretty sure that was
that's where
you took your
you're definitely a Gettysburg guy, knowing that. Yeah, I was it was when I was making a video about the Iron Brigade that I was down there.
That's
and
great.
I took that picture.
Very good. Well, we're glad to have you among.
Looks like JD's picture was taken in front of somewhere.
Yeah, I think you both have Gettysburg pictures. Look at that. That's great. That's great.
So we did have a couple of questions here. One from Eldon. He says, Andrew, how has the name change and the addition of the Shriver House impacted your institution? And then I'll let you answer that. And then there's a question for Jake as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're in the process of changing our name and brand. For many, many years, we've been the Adams County Historical Society, and now we are calling ourselves Gettysburg History, and we're in the process of making that change, which really helps us reach a little bit more into a national audience. We've been a local grassroots organization for a long time, but we've sort of outgrown our footprint, and with things like the film festival, the Shriver House Museum that you're mentioning, which we purchased last year, and also a new museum that we're creating on South Washington Street in Gettysburg that will be devoted to the Black history in our town, which is it's a phenomenal story and a phenomenal historic site. But with those three museums, including Beyond the Battle, the film festival, and some other projects and initiatives, films, Jake has a new film coming out about the Killer Angels and the Sheriff family, and that's one of our initiatives that we're very proud of. There's also a new movie being filmed here in Gettysburg now, Gettysburg 1863 by Bo Brinkman, that we are one of the producers of. But all of that said, this has really allowed us to grow and reach beyond our local audience and become a bigger and better organization. And I'm grateful for the question. It's been really well received, and we're going to continue to hopefully grow and do new and exciting things in Gettysburg for
So Jake, then the question for you is, what is a documentary film you want to make or wish you did?
Those are great questions. I mean, Andrew just referenced the one that I've been spending the better part of the past 2 years working on. So we are nearing the finish line. The next couple of months, we'll wrap it up on the Killer Angels. It's called the Gettysburg Book. It will be broadcast on public television at the end of this year. But we haven't announced it, but we're going to be doing a July 3rd screening in Gettysburg. And it is a film that has evolved in the making of it. It was really going to be focused on the battlefield at Gettysburg as told in Michael Shera's epic novel, The Killer Angels. And Steve Lang Pickett in the movie Gettysburg, of course, Colonel Quaritch, good friend of ours, and worked with him a lot, is the narrator. I mean, the sort of powerful edited version of The Killer Angels telling the story of the battle through Michael Shera's brilliant prose. But as we did some interviews to support the film with Jeff Shera, Michael's son, of course, we mentioned best-selling author, Gods and Generals, and many other books, the new one coming out, unfinished work on Lincoln later this year. And then his sister Lila and others, including Ken Burns and Martin Sheen. But with the Shera family in particular, we discovered a pretty intense story of the creation of the book. And again, we're in the midst of finishing the editing now, but it is Michael Shera and his family went through a lot, and the book lives forever, and we've all benefited for it, having that book. And it really, I don't think any other single book has affected the understanding of Gettysburg more than that one. I mean, certainly in the past 50 years, it's what inspired Ken Burns he read it, finished it in 1984 on Christmas Day, turned to his dad and said he's going to make a film on the Civil War. And his dad said, what part? And he said, all of it. And of course, Ken, a few years later, makes this film that we've been talking about, which launches both Ken Burns as a national icon and the Civil War as this cultural phenomenon for a new age. And then Ted Turner and Ron Maxwell make the movie Gettysburg, of course, starring Stephen Lang and Jeff Daniels.
And Ken Burns.
Yeah, Ken Burns is in a lot of cameos in that for sure. My dad was in that briefly. I mean, and again, that's an iconic movie here, and this has inspired so much. And of course, Jeff Shera goes on to this career. But the story of the family, which is very personal and has never really been shared before, certainly not the way it's been shared in this film, is it's harrowing, and it's been a very difficult film to make because of the intensity of the family relationships. Jeff did not talk to his father from 1974 until his dad died in 1988. And And his daddy, a couple years later, Ken's film comes out and leads to The Killer Angels becoming a bestseller. But his father, Michael Shera, again, writing one of the greatest Pulitzer Prize winning, truly one of the seminal American war novels, really never achieved much success from his writing. And it's sort of a tragic story, but it has a redemptive post-death cycle for him. But it's mixed, to steal Ken's edit room sign. It's complicated. And so a lot of people know that book. A lot of people know the documentary series that it inspired, and of course the movie Gettysburg. But I don't think anyone knows what the Sheras went through to get that book out there. And so that'll be coming out. So that's a film that we are nearly finishing. But other films that I would like to make, I think, is what the question was.
Yeah.
And, this is, how long do you have, right? And how much money do you have is the other question. But Andrew and I, we've talked a lot about this. Living in Gettysburg, it's such a unique place to do historical films. And we're working on this new Black History Museum at the Hopkins House. And I think it would be an amazing film to really tell the story of Black people during Gettysburg. I mean, it is literally a battlefield where people killed each other in the thousands, 51,000 casualties. And it's a turning point of a war that freed 4 million people. Yet there's really almost no references to the ending of slavery. And so how did that affect the people that, were being captured by Confederates, that were the community living here? There's a lot of new research going on the 5,000, maybe 10,000 or more Black people that came with the Confederate Army to Gettysburg. And it's a really, really unique perspective in a similar way that focusing on the civilians and beyond the battle. So that's a project that we're working on. And just fundamentally, the story of Gettysburg, before, during, and after the battle has not really been told in documentary film. We reference one of those stories, Mary Jemison, which shows up briefly in Ken's Revolutionary series. But one of the great kind of female, certainly Native American interactions of the 1700s and the 1800s is in this amazing account of Mary Jemison, an Irish woman captured by French and Shawnee, and lots of details, but lives all of her life, raises children in the Seneca world, experiences a revolution, the birth of the United States. And that's part of the Gettysburg and Adams County story. And all the way up to the battlefield and the Eisenhowers. And there's so much. So I think it would be very cool. It's probably a multi-part series. But if I had to pick one thing at this moment, it would be very cool to make. And it would take a lot of work and funding and support and all that stuff. But to really tell a full story of Gettysburg, in a long format.
So kind of like the Beyond the Battle Museum, which is telling the story of Gettysburg, not just the battle. You're talking about a documentary that would be something similar.
Yeah, that you could do it. You could really get into some of the characters, some who are very well known. Of course, Thaddeus Stevens spent a lot of his career in Gettysburg. Dwight Eisenhower was from a young age affected by Gettysburg, of course, retired here and lived here. But there's, just how Americans understand who they are following the battle in Gettysburg, really from the day after, people start coming here to understand what happened here. Now, a lot of that is finding their sons that are dead or dying or missing and so forth, and a lot of the immediate aftermath of the battle. But it becomes a memorial, and we are still fighting about the meaning of that. Who gets to put monuments up? What can we commercialize? Can you put a train here? Can you put a casino there? Can you do this or that? As preservation has taken away taxes, so forth and so on. And it's a really interesting commentary on what we find important as Americans. And again, it's complicated, and there's many sides to that story. So understanding us, and just the idea that we preserved all this land. It's all usable land. That could be real estate, could be farmland, could be whatever, but we use it to understand the 51,000 people that died here, but for a greater purpose, i.e. the salvation of this country that we're all living in. And so I think that there's a lot to learn from Gettysburg. Obviously, the 3 days of the battle and the 3 minutes of Lincoln's speech are the most significant historical facts, and that's central to all of this. You can't look at Gettysburg without that. But because of that, it gives Gettysburg this importance that it punches above its weight. It's a town of 7,000-8,000, yet everyone knows what it is, and it is a microcosm of the American story. So that would be a fun one to do, but it would be I have no illusions about how much work or effort that would take years of my life, but it would be cool to do. Right, Andrew?
Yeah, I love it. We should do it.
You make you make a really good point. I mean, Gettysburg and the Civil War as a whole, probably one of the most written about events in history, right? And yet there are still stories that have never been told.
Sure.
And we're talking, that's just from my own personal motivation, has nothing to do with Gettysburg per se, but the book that I just finished writing this afternoon, is telling the story of 132 guys that nobody's ever heard of in a company of soldiers that fought out west. And, and I could do that hundreds of times over, never run out of books to write because there's so many stories we haven't told yet. And, you mentioned about the story of the African Americans who were in Gettysburg. I grew up going to the Gettysburg battlefield and never knew until the film festival a couple years ago that there's a black cemetery in Gettysburg. Yeah. And that's been a part, Andrew, hasn't it, of what you guys have been doing too?
Yeah, absolutely. It is just it's an incredible story. We're only 8 miles from the Mason-Dixon line. So this is a free black community living literally on the edge of their own freedom and safety. And there are incidents of kidnappings, attempted kidnappings. There are, as the Confederate Army comes into Pennsylvania, of course, there's people rounded up and taken south. It's a story. It has courage, it has tragedy, it has adversity. There's everything you could hope for in a story of this community. It's a small community, only about 10% of the population of Gettysburg, but there's so much pride and joy from the descendants of these individuals, and allowing them to now be part of this process. That we meet every month with a group of descendants, and they are driving, the artifacts and the stories and the photographs, and we're seeing things and learning things that we've never had access to before because of their generosity and their desire to see, their history represented in the big tapestry of Gettysburg that, like you said, has been everywhere in the world, but has never really included people like Basil Biggs or Abraham Bryant or Mag Palm or Owen Robinson. And these are people who, it's not just boring local history that you might see, no offense to other places in the country, but I like to say that because of what happened in Gettysburg, because of all these through lines and these stories that are intersecting with national history and even internationally significant history, our local history, I think, is the best in the country. And so these are the stories that we want to really, we want to get more of them out there.
And Chris, just to add to Andrew's point, and the film festival is essential to this, is that people come here, kids with their school trips, retirees on their, RV trips, all sorts of families, like the Sheriff family came here in the 60s and ended up, writing this defining book. Like all this kinds of people come to Gettysburg, and yes, it's to see the battlefield and the museums and the cemetery where Lincoln spoke and to sort of commemorate the dead that died here. But in some ways, it's really this portal to the American story. And no doubt the 3-day battle and Lincoln's speech are the pinnacle of that here. But what it gives us is this opportunity to, whether it be the American Revolution or World War II, people are receptive to history. They're here for that reason. And I think that's it's a really powerful place to be because of that. And you have people, again, that want to understand who we are. And we can use that in Gettysburg.
Yeah. So
it's an endless fascination. I mean, I think that's, and we've all caught that bug, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers have too. And I think everybody has a different, gateway into it. But once we
called it the gateway drug. Yeah. Last year, I think we referred to Gettysburg as the gateway drug.
It is. I mean, everybody has that magical experience of just being in a place where something transformative happened. There's nothing else like that. I think there is a deeply human fascination with time and the passage of time over places, and to understand a story and be able to recreate it in your mind's eye, and to be able to stand there and in that same exact place and feel that connection to those people that you'll never meet. That is something, everybody has their own version of that magical experience, but that, I think that's the power of Gettysburg is that, and people will continue to seek that out and come here to find that.
So a couple of comments here. One from Marstar Miller. I wish more stories of the Civil War would be about the women that served and risked their lives for the cause. I agree 100%. And, so going back to the film festival, we do have the actress who played Anna Strong, who was a part of the Culper Ring, who was this spy ring for George Washington. And so women were a part of that story, and women are a part of the revolution in many other ways too. And I think Ken does a great job in highlighting some of their stories in his documentary. And that's not just like woke revisionist history. That's shining a light on people who have been forgotten, who were essential parts of these stories.
Right. Yeah. Can I make one point about that? I've been trying to, because the discussion about woke history, it comes up all the time, and I see it. And, I just wish that everybody could get on the same page with the idea that more history is never bad. We are not.
100%.
I think the history of the famous generals, whether it be Washington or Eisenhower or Grant or any of these, that's great. Let's do more of that. But let's just lift everything up. Let's put as much history as we can out to people. And it doesn't, I don't understand why people feel that there has to be this competition, or, if we're doing this, we're not doing that, or this deserves more attention than this. We're in a free country, and I think everybody should seek out the stories that most interest them. If it's George Washington, great. If it's Eliza Hamilton, or if it's, any of these other, more obscure, lesser known figures, more is more. We should all be advocating for more history.
And I love that. I love the way you put that.
And to that point, it has to be interpreted for our time. I mean, I think that's the thing, is that it's like, again, the way Lincoln spoke on a podium at a cemetery was what people traveled many miles to go and see. And now it's, whether it be going to a movie theater or looking at your handheld device or your goggles with whatever immersive thing or whatever AI is going to shove down our throats in a matter of minutes. Like, we're going to have to know our own story. We're going to have to know our history. And there's going to be people like Ken Burns or Lynn Miranda that are going to take our history and take certainly what the scholars like Annette Gordon-Reed or Rick Atkinson or all these great people, Harold Holzer and so forth, have done, and bring that to a really wide audience. And it's lightning when, it's like lightning strikes to get it. But I think we need to encourage that. And wherever you find that story, we need to go there, and we need to
a lot of people, I remember when Hamilton came out, people were complaining, well, why do you have a Hispanic actor playing Alexander Hamilton and all this? And, I'll confess, when I first heard about it, I was like, I don't know, but if it's making history more accessible, if it makes it open to more people and causes them to want to know more about the real George Washington, the real Alexander Hamilton. If a movie like The Patriot, which obviously is tremendously flawed in terms of how it tells the story of what happened, if that causes more people to be interested in the absolute bloodbath that was a civil war in the Carolinas during the Revolution, and they dig into the real history, then awesome.
It's a history. I mean, these things are history lessons in disguise, and we should appreciate that. If popular culture and music and entertainment can bring people in, that is so true. That is, we can't, would we rather have somebody not exposed to these, lessons? That I think about that with Hamilton. People don't like it. That's fine. But, we have a very uneducated populace, and getting history and getting civics in front of people, we have to do more of that. We have a responsibility to children to expose them to these stories. And, I have, if they're going to find it and enjoy it in some way that is, 80% or 70% accurate, or even 50% accurate, that I think that's great. I think, the alternative is them scrolling through, TikTok and and not getting anything. So I think that's a great point, Chris.
My daughter, she's interested in history, but there's absolutely no way that my 20-year-old daughter would know anything more about Alexander Hamilton than that he was on the $10 bill, if she even knew that, because nobody uses cash anymore. But now she could tell you that he wrote 51 of the Federalist Papers, and she can tell you that his wife outlived him by 54 years and helped raise money for the Washington Monument, and all this stuff, because some dude from Manhattan wrote what he thought was just a hip-hop concept album that he performed in the White House 15 years ago, and became this incredible phenomenon. So we've all benefited from that. All right, here's a great question that I can ask both of you guys. We'll start with Andrew. What's the best part about being raised in or around Gettysburg?
Oh, wow. You might have to come back to me. There's so much. I think we take for granted. I'll give a quick answer, but we take for granted, I think, just the amount of the open, beautiful space that we have here. I mean, this is not necessarily a historic answer, but I when I visit people in cities, or more dense, suburban, urban areas, we have 6,000 acres of beautiful open country that we can explore with, another fact or lesson to be uncovered around every corner. And I just found that endlessly fascinating as a kid that you could
But then
go
you're
out.
also super close to Philadelphia and Baltimore and Washington, and
That's true. But I guess just the amount of both natural and historical resources to be enjoyed. It's an extraordinary thing.
Jake, what about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up here. I mean, I'm literally, my joke is in my 40s, I moved back into my parents' house with my wife and my kids, which is true. We built a small cottage for my parents to be in nearby, and we're renovating this farmhouse. I mean, we're talking about Basil Biggs. Literally, the fireplace you see behind me is a historic fireplace that was in the house that Basil Biggs lived in during the Civil War. It was an underground railroad stop. It was also during the Battle of Gettysburg, a Confederate hospital for Semmes and Barksdale's brigades. There was 40 some Confederates buried here. And so it's sort of like underground railroad stop, Confederate burial ground. So I grew up in the midst of it. And then I spent about 2 decades, as I say, from 9/11 to COVID in New York City, most of that time living in Harlem, uptown, but in the East Village and other places too. And so, you know, I've lived elsewhere, and then having kids, it's an amazing place to raise kids being raised here. We live on Marsh Creek, which is, of course, the creek where the Marsh Creek settlement that evolved into Gettysburg was founded. So we feel very connected to the history beyond just the Battle of Gettysburg, which I'm about 3/4 of a mile from the edge of the battlefield and even closer to the Eisenhower farm. And so it's such a rich history, but it's just a wonderful community, you know, and it's a small town, so there's the things with small towns where everybody knows everybody, so people might know your business and know their business, but that also makes people watch out for you. And so it's a really supportive community. It's both kind of small town, but there's a college here. Gettysburg College is a wonderful place. My dad was a professor there. Andrew's mom was there, so that's a wonderful institution. The public schools are great. And of course, the national park and the battlefield and the cemetery make it this really rich place. And so to be in kind of small town, rural America, yet, like you said, close to DC or Baltimore or Philly or New York. I mean, I can get back to my own place in New York City in a few hours, is really neat. And again, the nature, that kind of stuff is powerful. But I think just this sense of connecting to this place, be it the natural environment, and there's such a sense of preservation, not just for historic preservation, but also for the richness of the beauty of the land and the ecology and saving farmland and we have a huge state park here, which the Appalachian Trail runs through. And so it's just a pretty diverse place. And, you know, I've, been here a lot of my life now, and it's kind of fun to look back now, like literally be in the old farmhouse that I grew up in. And this is where my dad did this thing that I remember decades ago. And now here's my little 4-year-old daughter doing whatever she's up to with dancing or whatever she's into. And so it's sort of fun to have that generational connectivity for me in a singular place, let alone a place that's tied to the center of the American story.
All right, so we're gonna wrap this up here in just a minute, but I wanna throw a question at you guys, just about, since you're both from there and you're more familiar with the battlefield than anybody. What is your personal hidden gem? Either a spot on the battlefield, a monument, a story, a place, a museum other than your own. What is your hidden gem that if people were coming that they might not otherwise know about, that you would send them to? Andrew?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. The first thing that comes to mind is actually, I mentioned this earlier, but I grew up on the First Days battlefield, and the former Gettysburg Country Club golf course, when I was a kid, was still a golf course, and then was acquired in part by the American Battlefield Trust, and then turned over to the National Park Service, and is now this kind of little known a tag on to the traditional kind of First Days battlefield on the west side of Willoughby Run. But I love going out there and just walking along Willoughby's Run. You can walk down to the creek from behind I think it's the 2nd Wisconsin Monument, down that path. It might be the 7th Wisconsin Monument. I used to know that. And then you can walk along the banks of the creek. If you cross over, there's a path that takes you along the banks of the creek, and it's just such a relaxing place, which is, I've just always been struck by I've really researched that. I actually wrote a book about it, but I've really researched that area a lot because it's my neighborhood. I grew up there, and it's just very personal to me. But it is just such a beautiful, serene, calm place where you can hear the water, and you see wildlife running through, and look up the hill, and you can see the hill that the Pettigrew's Brigade charged up, to hit the Iron Brigade and in the woodlot, Herbst woodlot. But if you walk all the way down that path, there's just a little nook where Willoughby Run sort of forks off, and it just sticks out a little. And when you go up to that little embankment, you can look up the hill, and the Park Service cleared a lot of trees in this area, and it's just this beautiful. You don't see any cars, no lights, nothing modern. And I like to go out there sometimes and just sit, and it's so beautiful, but at the same time, it's just the scene of such awful, horrendous violence. And so that juxtaposition, I think, is I've always been fascinated by that, and it's a comforting place to me because I grew up there, but I also it's made me want to learn more and read more and understand more, so that when I can visualize what took place there, the more I read, the more accurate I can create that picture.
It's interesting, as you were describing that, before you got to the part about the juxtaposition, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, because of my own connection to that exact place, my great-great-great-grandma had a brother in the 26th North Carolina who was killed there, right there.
Wow.
Andrew Jackson McGuire, he died right on those fields there fighting against the Iron Brigade. And it's fascinating to think about how beautiful a place can be, and yet how ugly it must have been on July 1st. And
I think about the age of these soldiers. It's just stunning to me. I mean, I'm 29 now, and to think that most of them were younger than I am.
The 26th Colonel was a kid.
Yeah, Henry Burgwin. Yep, the 21, the boy colonel, I believe. He was mortally wounded right there. But it's so off the beaten path that I almost never see anyone else out there. And so there's a certain kind of solitude and reflection from being in a place like that. And with your own connection, I can't imagine how much even more that would be meaningful to be there and think about all of that. But at the same time, how, it's a beautiful thing though, that we've saved this land and that we people can actually enjoy it and reflect. And I think that that's probably the best way we can really honor these people's sacrifices, to make sure this is sacred and that people can go there to reflect.
Jake, what about you? What's a hidden gem for you on the battlefield?
On the actual national park, I mean, we live on an old farm on Marsh Creek, and we spent a lot of time on the rocks and banks and jumping in the creek. And it's a creek that was probably used for the Underground Railroad. And so that's very profound to me, but that's not the national park per se. It's on the actual park. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful places. I made a film a little over a decade ago called The Gettysburg Story, and we searched out a lot of obscure places to tell the story with a landscape, but also to get gorgeous landscape cinematography. And so there's some really special places to find. I mean, I think there's sort of the classic ones, like the dramatic ones, like, obviously Little Round Top. Everybody knows about Little Round Top, but there's kind of a cool path. Probably the easiest way to get there, this isn't super obscure, but not a lot of people do it, is to go probably park at Devil's Den, and you would hike up through what's called Devil's Kitchen, which is sort of a mini Devil's Den. And then you can cross up and you can get up to Big Round Top. And there's a couple trails up Big Round Top, sort of a main one, which is pretty dilapidated. There actually, I think maybe 100 years ago, there used to be a national park tower up there, which you can see the remnants of. And of course, Big Round Top famously, although it's the highest point on the battlefield, was not a useful battle position. And so although Chamberlain and others were up there, it wasn't really a place where there's any fighting, but there were soldiers up there. But it gives you this view, especially in the winter, when you can see through all the trees, and you can see both the whole battlefield, including Little Round Top before you, but it's kind of isolated. And then you go on the backside of it, and it's really rugged cliffs, like 50, 70-foot cliffs of rocks, trees. There's often a lot of storm damage up there, so there's like precarious trees and stuff. And it's kind of this rugged adventure, almost like Appalachian mountain adventure right in the battlefield, which is tied to the actual battlefield. And so it's not a super hard hike by any means. It's maybe half a mile or a mile, depending on how you do it. You got to climb up, and depending on where you go, there's some rocks, but it's pretty dramatic. Again, it's not super inaccessible, but I don't think a lot of people go there. And especially if you go down the backside of Big Round Top, and then you can kind of see down into Maryland, and depending on how clear the day is, panoramas of, I don't know how many states you can see, but it's pretty cool because it's sort of looking east and south from there. It's very flat, and so you can see really far, but then of course you can see the Appalachian mountain chain to the west and the north going above, and it kind of gives you a real sense of the regional geography as well that the armies would have been fighting in. So there's a lot. I could give you a dozen places that are really cool, but that's a cool one that's accessible. And if you to get there, just park at Devil's Den, kind of take the trail where, if anyone remembers, where the old there used to be kind of a public bathroom there that they took down a few years ago. But there's a trail that goes towards Big Round Top from there, and it's a very well marked trail, and you can get up, climb up however you want. But there's a couple paths up, and if you go the other direction, you can see the beaver pond, and so there's a hot button. You
There's a lot of jokes
right
about
now,
that.
but we won't talk about that.
We'll save that for later.
So before we wrap up here, so Rita, this is my cousin Rita, had a question about, and I'll just kind of chime in on this one. What's the biggest myth about Civil War medical practices or surgeries during the battle? So one cool thing about Gettysburg battlefield is that several of the hospital sites are preserved, some of the barns and different things like that were used. But I think probably in general, not just Gettysburg specifically, but the Civil War in general, is this idea that they were hacking off arms and legs with no anesthetic all over the place. Now, it may have happened a little more at Gettysburg than it did in other places because of how many casualties there were, but something like 97% of amputations in the Civil War were done with anesthetic. They had ether, they had chloroform, but I guess we'll close with this. I'll ask you this, Andrew, because I know the museum covers a lot of this, is that's one of the untold stories of the Battle of Gettysburg, isn't it? That you've got a town of a little over 2,000 people that is now inundated with tens of thousands of casualties after the battle. And what do they do with them all? What do you think people should know about that part of the story?
Well, it's horrific. I mean, if you think about the tens of thousands of wounded left behind in a town of just a couple thousand people, when people say every building was used as a hospital, that is true. Not only every building, every church, every shed, every barn, every structure that could possibly be taken over and used for that purpose was. And so it's hard to imagine what the local citizens went through. And this didn't just go on for a day or two. This was weeks before they were able, eventually that later in the month, they established Camp Letterman General Hospital east of town, and they were able to consolidate and remove the wounded. Most of the wounded, not all, most were taken out to that camp. But, I think the part that doesn't get through is that civilians died. They died of disease. They died of picking up unexploded ordnance on the battlefield, handling weapons. The toll was far beyond the typical. Everyone knows about Jenny Wade, who was killed tragically on the morning of July 3rd in her home. She's often referred to as the only casualty of the Battle of Gettysburg, but that is not true. She's the only civilian killed during the fighting, but there were other civilians killed. There's in the 20s, if not 30 total civilian casualties if you add up. My colleague Tim Smith has a full count where he tabulates, what he counts as a casualty and what he doesn't. But there are people captured and taken into southern prisons, especially town officials throughout the county. And then, of course, there's disease, there's handling these things in the aftermath, and others that were wounded. There were several civilians shot, including John Burns, who's very famous. But I would say he did that to himself by going out there. There were other civilians who were shot just going about their business. John Burns was out fighting with the Union Army. But the toll on the civilians was dramatic. And you really, the reason we know that, in addition to all the accounts they left, are that these obituaries, when these civilians passed away in the 1920s or 30s or 40s, they almost all lead with, witnessed the battle, hid in the basement during the battle, treated the wounded during and after the battle. This was trauma that they carried with them for the rest of their lives. And Gettysburg would never be, there was no normalcy afterwards. I mean, Gettysburg was fundamentally just totally turned on its head. I mean, it became a different place. It was about a different thing. People started coming here. Tourists, if you could call them that, started arriving within days of the battle.
Yeah.
There were sightseers. This is how, there was no television or radio or anything back then. People traveled to see, curiosity seekers to see the battlefield. And so everything was just completely transformed about their lives. And the aftermath is a fascinating subject, which we have quite a bit on in our museum, but it needs a lot more attention, I think.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up right here. GettysburgFilmFestival.org. Definitely get your tickets sooner rather than later. There's not many left for some of these events. Some of them you said are going to go live tomorrow, like the event that I'm doing, JD and Jared and Chris. So definitely check that out. That's going to be the very first event of the Gettysburg Film Festival. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be incredible. We've got some amazing things. Hopefully, a few more guests will still yet be announced between now and then.
I think so. Yeah.
Awesome.
We're working on it. Yep.
And this video will stay up on the channel, so a lot of people will be watching it afterwards. So if any questions in the comments, leave those, and I'll try to answer those as best I can. And if I can't answer it, I'll ask Andrew or Jake and get an answer for you. So thank you guys so much. Looking forward to seeing you in just a few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for all you do, by the way. I know you don't get thanked enough you got a lot of people who really appreciate everything that you contribute and all the stories that you tell on this channel.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
See you soon.